Hi, I'm Dr. Avanti Kumar Singh. In over 20 years of practicing both Western medicine and Eastern healing traditions, the most important thing that I've learned is that healing is a journey we take together. So on this podcast, I'll be demystifying Ayurveda and other integrated medicine, showing how these simple, ancient practices are the keys to unlocking a healthy modern life. We are all healing catalysts because healing starts within. It starts with you, and it starts right now. This is a Soulfire production. Episode number 129. Did you know that the key to your child's mental health and well-being might not be found in their mind, but in their gut? Yep, you heard that right. So today we're exploring the gut-brain connection and how the gut microbiome affects anxiety and depression in kids and teens. Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome back to the Healing Catalyst podcast. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm Dr. Avanti, and I am so happy that you're here with me. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in again today to listen to the podcast, because I know that there are a lot of things that you can be doing with your time. And the fact that you're here listening so that you can learn more about how to support your health and the health of the people around you is really important to creating a life of vitality. So here in the United States, we are coming off the Memorial Day holiday weekend, which really kind of kicks off the summer. It always has in my mind anyway. And with summer vacation starting and the kids being home, a lot of parents notice that their children's anxiety tends to decrease during the summer season. Without the pressures of school and homework and extracurricular activities and on and on and on, our kids' nervous systems get a much needed break. And this can actually be a really ideal time to address any underlying anxiety that they have in a holistic way. You know, I remember when my kids were younger, the freedom of summer meant that we had more unstructured time where the pace just slowed down. And there was a noticeable calm in our home. And as a result, I also noticed that both Zane and Isha, my kids, would slow down and their anxiety decreased significantly. And so, of course, being a doctor and an Ayurvedic practitioner, I talked to my kids about this a lot. And during the summers, we practiced tools to teach them how to regulate their nervous systems. Many of the tools that I teach you on this podcast. And if you ask them now, they will tell you that although they complained about it all the time, that I was bothering them about breathing and eating and doing yoga and moving their bodies and all that stuff, that now as adults, they still use all of the tools that we learned together when they were younger. I like to think that my talking about these topics with them is part of the reason that they both studied psychology in college and that my son Zane is now a clinical therapist. And yes, I am that mom who would love for both her kids to become clinicians of some kind. Yep, I've turned into my immigrant parents. I know, it's funny, but anyway, and so many of you might be thinking, well, Avanti, you had the knowledge to help your kids in that way, which is true. It's correct. And this is the reason that I know that you are going to find this episode so incredibly helpful. Today, I'm joined by the brilliant Dr. Elisa Song, who is making waves in the world of child health. And you'll understand why in just a moment. Dr. Song is a Stanford, NYU, UCSF trained integrative doc, integrative pediatrician, and pediatric functional medicine expert. And most importantly, she's also the mother to 2 thriving young children. She is on a mission to revolutionize the future of children's health and has dedicated her career to helping patients and parents and practitioners bridge the gap between conventional and holistic pediatrics with an evidence-based, pediatrician-backed, parent-approved approach. Dr. Song has lectured around the world at leading integrative and functional medicine conferences and premier parenting events. She's also been featured in hundreds of top podcasts, print and online media outlets, including Forbes, Healthline, Mind Body Green, National Geographic, Parents Magazine, Motherly, Parade, and the New York Post. Her first book, Healthy Kids, Happy Kids, an integrative pediatrician's guide to whole child resilience, was released just 2 weeks ago and has already made the USA Today bestseller list, and it's also #1 on Amazon in family practice medicine. In our conversation, Dr. Song helps us understand the alarming numbers of anxiety disorders among children and teens in the US and why raising awareness is more important than ever. I have to tell you, I was so alarmed by these numbers. She also walks us through how anxiety and depression manifest in kids and teens and explains the role of the gut microbiome in mental health. We also discuss the concept of microbiome resilience and the importance of the vagus nerve in gut-brain health. Dr. Song also shares how to boost heart rate variability, a key biomarker for gut health, and gives us strategies for using food, exercise, and sleep to support the mental health of our kids and teens. So many of you have requested that we cover more topics specifically on how to support the health of our kids in a more integrative way, which is why I knew that Dr. Song would be an invaluable resource for you. I know that by the end of this episode, you'll be empowered with practical tools and a deeper understanding of how to support your children's mental health in a more holistic way. So let's get into it. I'm so happy to share my conversation with Dr. Elisa Song about the connection between the microbiome and anxiety in kids and teens. Hello, Elisa. I am so excited to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me during your book tour right now. You're busy launching your new book. So thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks you for having me. It's my honor and my pleasure. And I'm so glad we get to connect this way.
I know, me too. We met a few years ago. I think during the pandemic, we were on a panel together. Was the first time we met, and we've kind of
gosh, it seems like ages ago.
I know, right? It does feel like that. And we kept in touch, and I've been sort of following along your journey. You have a new book out, which is so exciting. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's my book baby. I have 3 babies now at home. So
Yep, exactly. And so, your book is really, you're integrative pediatrician out in California. And, I really wanted to sort of dive into the topic of kids and teens. My podcast is usually, centered around adults, but so many of the adults that listen to this podcast have kids at home and they want to take an integrative approach towards their kids. And I have been getting that feedback from so many of the listeners. And so I thought, Elisa is absolutely the person to talk to about this topic. So I would love to jump into the topic of anxiety and mental health for teens and kids, specifically anxiety, depression, because this is Mental Health Awareness Month when this episode will be going live. And I know that this is something that so many of us parents are challenged with right now, is really navigating this world of mental health for our kids. And so let's start with sort of talking about the problem. How prevalent are anxiety disorders among children and teens today in the United States?
So first I'm going to just say, if you are a parent who has a child or a teen with anxiety or depression, you are definitely not alone. And it is so important for all of us to, raise the awareness, which is why I'm so grateful for you having me on your podcast, because there are so many ways that we can either, mitigate or even prevent this huge rise in anxiety in our children and teens. And through the pandemic, at one point, and like we said, it seems like it ages ago, but at some point, mental health was declared a state of emergency for our children and teens during the pandemic, with the increasing rates of, suicidality and visits to the ER, especially among our teenage girls, but even in kids as young as 8 years of age. Wow. So it was just heartbreaking. And really and truly, there was a state of emergency long before the pandemic. Long before. And so I'm hoping that, the sirens that were kind of sounded during the pandemic, that they don't let up, because we really need to understand that, now by the time kids are teenagers, 1 in 2 is going to end up with some sort of a mental health diagnosis. Wow. And for our teenage girls in particular, 1 in 3 teenage girls has an actual anxiety disorder. And this is diagnosed. I mean, how many of our kids don't have a diagnosis, but they're living with anxiousness every day that is just barely on the edge of manageable, or not, but they're not seeking help. And, 1 in 4 teenage girls has seriously thought of suicide. And, sadly, 1 in 10 has actually tried. And so this is, if you have teenage girls or boys, someone in their high school, one of their friends
Yes.
could be one of these. And they're not saying, right? They're not telling us.
Right.
And so it really takes us as parents and practitioners to understand the nature of this, be aware, and support our teens in a way that they can embrace.
Yeah. I mean, I had to take a breath, because that is a scary statistic that 1 in 2 teens is dealing with a mental health issue, anxiety, suicidality. I mean, it's alarming and it's upsetting. And it's sort of like, what is going on in our world? I mean, that is a bigger issue we could talk for hours about. But, and I think your point about, these kids are not saying it to us, to the adults in their life. They're not revealing it even to their friends. They're not revealing it to anyone. So I think this is a really important point, is that, what are some of the signs and symptoms, some of the things that we should be looking for in our teens and the teens that are around our teens, their friends, that we can sort of have a look out for, because it can be pretty nuanced. So what are some of those signs that we could be looking for?
That's on a certain level for our younger kids. It's almost a little easier because we can see they are with us so much more. So we see a change in their behaviors. We can see them, tantruming more or crying more or getting more clingy, and, really need to stop and think, for our kids, sit down with them and just, say, hey, honey, what's going on? Right. Or maybe we can deduce, what's going on.
Sure.
But once our kids become tweens and teens and, our reach as parents become less, we just don't have as much of an opportunity often to be with our kids. And you're right, it can be really subtle. And sometimes it's just really with us as parents, just having our eyes wide open, noticing any changes in sleep patterns, any changes in exercise patterns that aren't related to necessarily to increased, sports team commitments. Just, maybe a little more sullenness, a little more anger. It might not appear as anxiousness, but sometimes it is a little more jumpiness, when you're asking them a question. And, of course, tweens and teens notoriously can be a little snappy with their parents, right? But if it's getting worse, we're just looking for a change in maybe how they're dressing a little bit and, who it seems like they're hanging out with. This is where, as parents, we want to be involved. We don't want to hover, but we want to know who our kids' friends are. We want to know, what they're doing after school. If they say, hey, mom, I'm going to be hanging out with your friends, not grilling them, but, oh, okay, honey, where are you going? And asking and sharing. And, oftentimes the best conversations to be had with our children is actually in the car.
I know.
So what I recommend, and I've done this with my kids who are tweens now, is I've said, look, the car is a phone-free zone.
Yes.
Right. Let's just, it's a 5-minute ride to school. Let's just phones off. There's no need. You're going to see your friends in 5-8 minutes, whatever it is. So phones off. And sometimes it's, your siblings having conversations or your friends and your child having conversations that you can pick up certain things that are just, if you have a spidey sense, if you have like a mama sense or, a papa sense that something is changing, listen to that and talk to your kids, open the door. And for a lot of our kids, it's just easier when we're having conversations when we're not looking them in the eye. Like I said, the car, or maybe, when we're going to the mall shopping for whatever. Right. School dance dress, something, right? It's another way that we can just have that casual conversation where things will just, open up sometimes. Yeah. For some of our kids who, we often think of kids who may be slipping in their grades, but for other kids, it's a high intensity, high pressure. They just have to, they fall apart if they get an A-. And that's something we want to pay attention to as well.
Yeah, no, I think all of these are such good points to think about. And I think your point about noticing a change is really important, because it can get really difficult when they're in that teenage, age, when hormones are changing and there's lots of changes going on that you're like, oh, maybe they're just being snappy because they're a tween or a teen.
Yeah.
But then I think your point also about really trusting your gut, your spidey sense as a parent, is so important. I remember actually in medical school, actually, a neonatologist. I was on a neonatology rotation during pediatrics. And one of my mentors, and I actually did research with him, he actually said to me, and I was actually pregnant with my second kid at that time because I was
Oh
pregnant in
my
medical
gosh.
school. I'm
That
crazy.
is crazy.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I remember him saying, the most important thing you can do when you are in a room with a patient, with a pediatric patient and a parent, is really listen to what the parents are saying.
Yeah.
You can get so much information because they have a sense of what's going on, and
Mhm.
you can deduce a lot from what they're saying. And I've never forgotten that. And I actually took it as advice for myself in parenting, that trust your gut. And
Yeah.
that was sort of the message he was giving us as medical students, is the parents have a gut instinct of something. So you need to really listen in to what are they noticing? What are they talking to you about? It's not necessarily thinking that they're just, hyper vigilant and, helicoptering or anything like that.
Yeah.
They have a spidey sense. So I think that is such an important point that you made, is listen to your spidey sense
Yeah. I
if you
love
think
that.
something is wrong.
Wise attending. I mean, this is
Yes.
something, yes, that,
Right.
any of us practitioners or educators who are working with children would be wise to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, let's move on. So those are some of the, signs, symptoms that we can kind of look for, those changes that we're observing, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so let's move into, sort of the science of what we think might be going on, especially from your perspective as an integrative doc, as an integrative pediatrician. And you've written extensively about this in your new book, Healthy Kids, Happy Kids, about the gut brain connection. And I know, we've covered this a lot on this podcast in respect to, adults.
Yeah.
So how is the gut brain sort of involved in a child's mental health? Because it's sort of that developmental period, things are
Yep.
changing. Can you explain sort of what's happening in teens
Yeah.
and kids?
Well, it's interesting because we know, how much the gut microbiome and the gut brain connection affects adult mental health. And the same is true for
Right.
children and teenagers, as you alluded to, but on such a deeper level as well. Because developmentally, our infants and our toddlers, so what listeners may not know is in the first 3.5 years of life or so, your infant and toddler's microbiome is changing rapidly. There are multiple
Mm-hmm.
stages of development where it looks very different from an adult microbiome. And once they hit about, 3.5, 4, 5 years of age, their microbiomes take on a more adult-like pattern. But then that same rapid change in their gut microbiome,
Mm-hmm.
diversity and function, also occurs in the tween-teen years. And what's fascinating is that the changes that are going on in their brain, all of those synaptic
Mm-hmm.
connections, the trillions of connections that are being made, is really mirrored by what's going on in the gut. And it's the gut microbiome that's driving many of those brain changes. When we think about the main, information superhighway connecting the gut and the brain, 80 to 90% of that communication is actually from the gut to the brain. And
Mm-hmm.
when kids and teenagers come to me and, maybe they're talking about the anxiousness or the sleep disturbances or, so hard to get along with their friends or whatever it is,
Right.
what I let them know is, in age appropriate ways, but let them know that, what, those trillions of tiny microscopic, friends in your tummy, or for older kids, we call them probiotics, these microbiota,
Mm-hmm.
they are responsible for making at least 80 to 90% of your serotonin. And
Mm-hmm.
serotonin is your feel good, relax, be able to manage stress, fall asleep more easily, brain
Mm-hmm.
chemical, but it's actually mostly a gut chemical. And when I let parents and kids know and teens know, a lot of times their eyes open wide and like, oh my gosh, wow, now I understand why Dr. Song keeps saying, we have to take care of our microbiome. And I'm going to, just share some studies that are a little bit alarming, but it is what it is. We just have to know, right? These studies are
Yes.
not to, elicit feelings of guilt in us moms, which I know sometimes they do, right?
Yeah.
But we have to then just know that, okay, this is the backstory. This is telling your child's story, maybe how they got there. But, there's a very large study in Denmark that looked at mother-infant pairs and antibiotic use and found that even just one round of antibiotics could increase the risk of mental health concerns when your kids were older and teenagers by up to 50%. that risk was highest when those antibiotics were given within the first 6 months of life, including in utero exposure. So, for many of us mamas, we get sinus infections or UTIs, or we had group B strep, vaginally when we were birthing our babies. And of course, we took antibiotics then.
Right.
But even that, and then the more rounds of antibiotics, the higher the risk. We know this in adults too. But when we're looking at this for children, we then want to understand, okay, maybe this is how we got there, to this state of being diagnosed with anxiety or depression or heading that way. How do we then figure out how to reverse that? Because we always can. It may take a little longer, the longer that microbiome disruption has been set, but it's never too late to restore, a microbiome to a healthy state, which is why I wrote this book. I wouldn't have written it if there was no hope, right? Because I'm a mom, I can see all the forces against our children's microbiomes and really working against our kids' mental, physical, immune health. So there's so much that we can do.
Right. And I think that that's such an important point is that, so many of us end up feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I made that mistake. We think of it as a mistake that we let our child have antibiotics, but, an infection is an infection and this is what we have. And, you come from a very integrative mindset also of like, if you have an issue like that, you got to do what you got to do. But I think your point is so well taken is that all hope is not lost. We can actually reverse these things. And I think that is such an important message for everyone listening, whether you're talking about your kids or you're talking about yourself, because so many times we even, apply that to ourselves and we say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I took antibiotics for this or that or whatever. And we're like, oh my gosh, I'm doomed because of the studies and, sort of the crazy, sound bites that come out from the studies in the media, and then we all freak out. And so, that is a really important point that you're making. And so how do we start to, maybe let's move into this idea of microbiome resilience, because you talk a lot about that in the book and in most of your work. So what do you mean by that?
So, the term resilience really kind of came to the forefront in our minds during the pandemic. And it is a concept that, I've been speaking about for forever when it comes to children, because, wellness is such a static phrase.
Yes.
And so, the subtitle for my book is An Integrative Pediatrician's Guide to Whole Child Resilience.
Yeah.
And it originally was whole child wellness. And I'm like, but what is wellness really? It's this one point in time and it's fluid. And with resilience, when we talk about whole child resilience or microbiome resilience, what we're talking about is laying the foundations of health and wellness, laying the foundations for an optimal microbiome so that your child can then have an optimal gut-brain connection, gut immune system connection, even a gut epigenetic connection. And no matter what life throws their way, because there's always going to be something, right? Whether it's a round of antibiotics or any other number of factors that we know can disrupt the microbiome, including psychological stress or, ultra processed foods or whatever, even EMFs, whatever else that we're exposed to just by living in our modern world. How can your microbiome bounce back quickly and completely? That is the definition of resilience. It's not about being afraid of all of these things, just stressing out your child's microbiome and trying to avoid them. Of course, we want to reduce them where possible, but knowing that some things are not possible to reduce. And we also want our kids to be a part of this world with their friends. How do we help their microbiomes be so resilient that they don't stay in that permanent state of disruption, that they can come back and be restored and resilient for a lifetime?
I love this idea of resilience and that it's a really nuanced distinction you've made, but it's really important, the difference between resilience and wellness and this idea of, how can you sort of protect your immune response, your gut microbiome, right? Your brain, all of these things so that you can bounce back from, living in the modern world. I talk about that a lot in Ayurveda and on this podcast, because it's not like you can, bubble wrap yourself and put yourself in a corner and just be inside and never be in the world, in a modern world that has so many, quote, toxins, right? That are out of our control. How do you protect yourself is, I think, what you're really saying, so that you can really give yourself the best chance of bouncing back and being resilient, as you would say.
Absolutely. And this goes for kids and for adults. And I love
Yes,
that. We cannot bubble wrap ourselves or our children, nor should we strive to. We
exactly.
can reduce the exposures, but we know, through the literature, the harmful inflammatory effects of
Yeah.
loneliness,
Yes.
of not having community.
Yes.
We are social beings.
Yes.
And if we're going to live isolated in our world to try to protect ourselves from every single quote toxin, that
Right.
is no way to live either. And in
Yeah.
fact, that may be more inflammatory than being
Yes.
exposed to that toxin and building up resilience in the first place.
Ah, so important what you just said. Can you please say that again? Because I think that that is so, so key for so many of us who want to live in this holistic way where we're integrating, traditional healing, ancient healing with modern medicine. It's a struggle. And I will tell you that last year on this cancer journey that I was on, I had to face that head on as a physician, now being a patient, right? So can
Yeah.
you say that again? Because I think it's so
Yeah.
important for the listeners to hear what you just said.
Yeah. I mean, it is so important that as we see our social media posts and everything pointing to all the toxins that we should be afraid of, that we not live in fear, that we
Yeah.
have that hope that we can move forward and that we
Mhm.
don't want to isolate ourselves from the world, no matter what's going on, whether your child
Right.
has an autoimmune illness or you're going on a cancer journey, whatever it is.
Mhm.
Living in isolation and bubble wrapping yourselves is going to create more inflammation.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that I teach kids and parents how to do is to be able to live in our modern world and thrive. And also this idea of resilience, because it's not static, what we need to shift is this whole paradigm of how we're thinking about medicine and healing.
Mhm.
Because in conventional medicine, what we are moving towards, we're actually moving away from something. We're afraid of the viruses. We're afraid of the toxins. We're afraid of this, that, or the other disease occurring in our children. So we constantly have this picture in mind of a sick child that we're trying to prevent.
Yes.
The power of intention is so huge. What instead we need to do is move toward that picture of vibrancy and health. So
Mm.
hold in your mind that picture of this beautiful child, your child, living in the most vibrant, healthful way possible. And that is what we are moving towards. So when we have that picture in our mind, we can manifest that. We do not want to have in our mind all the time the thing we're running away from. So
Yeah.
it is really key, the shift. And
Yes.
unfortunately, I mean, as conventionally trained physicians, we do
Right.
need some of that. Of course, we
Of
want
course.
to, not have these, but
Yes.
that cannot be the sole way that we are, practicing and thinking about health for our kids.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely brilliant and it's so important. And I agree with everything you said because I do think that we are trained in Western medicine and therefore the way patients view Western medicine is that I got to prevent this, that, and the other.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to get sick. I have to fight the cancer. I have to fight the disease, right? All of these words we use. And, where we came from in healing, right? Where modern medicine came from was the idea of keeping you well, not
Yes.
preventing sickness, right? And that's
Yeah,
true in most traditional healing methods, right?
it is.
That physicians in these traditional healing methods were actually paid to keep patients well. They were not paid
Yeah,
when a patient got sick. They were paid when a patient was well. So it's
I
such a
love that.
different paradigm and it's such an important shift. And it's nuanced, but it changes everything about
Yeah.
how you approach health and wellness,
It
right?
really does. It really
Yeah.
does. And, there is a famous quote that Hippocrates is credited with saying
Mhm.
that many are familiar with, that all disease starts in the gut.
Yes.
And yet we have to step back and really flip that around and know that all health
Starts.
also starts in the gut.
Love
Because then we can move towards how do we create a healthful microbiome, not just be reactive, but
Mhm.
be proactive.
Mhm.
And that is the beauty of a more integrative, holistic approach. And as you said, it is what has been in the tradition of, many traditional forms of healing, Ayurveda, homeopathy. There is this innate trust in our body's healing capacities that we have lost in Western medicine.
Yeah.
And we need to regain that trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what all of us who are in this integrative world are trying to do is really
Mhm.
to move back to that paradigm of health rather than illness and moving towards how do we stay healthy, right?
Yeah.
How do we encourage our health and live with that vibrancy? I think that's really important. Before we go into more about the microbiome, I want to circle back to something that you said, which is that the microbiome actually affects your epigenetics. I'm curious about your perspective on that. And if you can just explain what epigenetics, just really quickly to the listeners, this is a really interesting idea that you're talking about. And I think it's pretty revolutionary. I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, it is one of the most fascinating areas of research right now. And epigenetics. So basically, epi means on top of. So on
Mhm.
top of our genes.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? For many of us, we know that there is a family predisposition. Oh, it's in my genes. And I have teenagers coming to me. Well, everyone on mom's side of the family has anxiety, or, everyone ends up getting
Right.
diabetes. It's in my genes. In a
Sure.
way to say, I'm doomed. Nothing I can do,
Right.
is going to make a difference. So why bother?
Yeah.
Right?
Again, that illness paradigm, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Now, what we are finding is, again, we have, somewhere, I mean, these numbers are kind of varied depending where you look, but somewhere up to, 10 times as many, microbial cells in and on us than human cells. They far outnumber us. Our gut microbiome, of the many different microbiomes in our body and on our body, is the largest microbiome. And our microbial genes make up anywhere from maybe 5 to 10 times or more of our own human genes. And our microbial genes actually interact with the foods we're eating, the phytonutrients from our food. We actually don't use the phytonutrients from our food, surprisingly, many of them. It's our microbes that do, and convert them into short chain fatty acids like butyrate, or vitamins like vitamin B12, that then affect how our genes get activated or not. And so it is really our microbiome that determines how our genes are expressed. So just because, everyone in the family gets type 2 diabetes at some point, well, guess what? If you have a healthy microbial composition that then can say, hey, those type 2 diabetes genes, we're not going to turn you on.
Right.
We're going to keep the genes that keep you healthy and metabolically fit.
Right.
That is what's going to move your health and your children's health towards staying metabolically fit. And guess what? Really and truly preventing that disease from happening. So,
Right.
I mean, our microbiome is responsible for so much of how our own genetics work for or against us.
Right.
And so, when we're thinking about, for kids and teenagers especially, I have them think about, look, whatever your goal is, whether it's to, not get diabetes like you saw your uncle getting and getting really sick from it, or, being able to be faster in the soccer field and have a more accurate goal shot, or, being able to focus better on your exams, whatever it is, when you show them the power of the microbiome to help support all of their goals, and how nourishing our microbiome actually helps our goals, it makes it so much easier for them to then think about, oh, the choices I'm making in how I'm living, how I'm eating, how I'm sleeping and moving my bodies,
Right.
I'm doing that to keep my microbiome healthy and happy so that I can be healthy and happy.
Right.
So it's an interesting kind of framing for kids and teenagers.
Sure.
It makes it easier to make those choices, just like as parents. I mean, if you're a mom or a dad, it is so much easier to make choices that you wouldn't necessarily make when it's in the interest of your own children.
Sure.
I mean, same thing with our microbiome. If we know that what we're doing is helping our microbiome, which actually is serving us, it does make it easier to make those shifts.
Right, right. So that is an amazing frame. And I just want to be clear that I'm understanding it correctly. And so let's say, for example, you have a child that has a lot of stress in their life for whatever reason. It could be a lot of changes going on in the family. Let's just pick something, right?
Yep.
That stress is what you're saying, is that is going to then affect the microbiome, which then affects whether those genes get turned on or turned off, which is epigenetics. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, a one-off, like a big temporary stressor is not going to make a huge difference.
Sure.
But if it's sustained,
Correct.
if you have sustained psychological stress, which absolutely can cause microbiome disruption, on some levels, maybe just as much or even more than antibiotics, or you have any other number of factors that are persistent and kind of chronically
Mm-hmm.
impacting your microbiome, then
Mm-hmm.
absolutely that is going to affect your epigenetics. And the younger your kids are when we recognize this, and the more that we can help to optimize their microbiomes, actually, the more solid a foundation we can set for their epigenetic future.
Right, right. And so then how early should we be really focused on, helping build this microbiome resilience in our
Mhm.
kids? I mean, are there certain points of their development that are more critical than others? Not that we shouldn't, I mean, we obviously want to be paying attention to this all the time, but are there some critical points that you've seen as an integrative pediatrician that you think
Yeah.
we should really focus in on?
I would say there are, ideal times. And
Mhm.
then, as you said, that at any point we want to pay attention to this. But I'm going to say even before your baby's born
Mm,
is a great time to start thinking about your baby's microbiome. Because as a mama, if you're listening, the health of your microbiome really
mm,
does influence the health and, future development of your baby's gut
mhm,
microbiome. So even before you get pregnant, you know, even for the papas in the group before you conceive,
mhm.
optimizing both of your microbiomes can really set a more positive epigenetic future in
Sure.
motion for your
Mhm,
baby, for your developing baby.
mhm.
Now, the more key times for intervening in the microbiome, I would say the most key time is when your baby is an infant.
Mhm,
So, again, in that 0 to 3.5 years of age, there are different stages, but 0 to 6 months is really ideal. If
mhm.
you're listening to this and you're pregnant or you have a
Right.
baby, this is the time to,
Mhm,
do the work. Consider doing, a functional stool analysis for your baby if there is a lot of eczema, asthma, or
mhm.
autoimmune, and you're thinking, how do I optimize my baby's gut microbiome at this stage? And then, from 6 months to 3.5 years of age, absolutely. And the nice thing about that stage is as parents, we have more
Yes.
control, more say
Yes.
over what gets
Right.
put into their mouths, right? And then how they're living.
Yeah.
And then for sure in the tween teen years,
Mhm.
that's more challenging as a parent
For
and more
sure.
challenging as a teenager. But that is also another key time where we want to, if we've started those conversations when they're younger, at least
Mhm,
your tweens and teens will know the foundations
mhm,
and can move back to that,
mhm,
whether it's not until college or later, but it's
mhm,
it's just letting them know and understand how
mhm.
to make those informed choices for themselves.
Right. No, I think that's super important. I actually have some experience with that. I mean, tween and teenage years were pretty important for both of my kids. And, because as I said, I had both my kids while I was in medical school. So there was a lot of my stuff that was affecting them, I'm sure. But we did a lot of sort of, repair
Yeah.
during the tween time. So that was really important for me personally and my family. Okay, so let's turn to one other thing and then we're going to get into some specific tools because I always like to give as many tools as we can to the listeners.
Yes, for
But I
sure.
wanted to talk about sort of this idea of the vagus nerve because you
Mm.
wrote pretty extensively in your book about the vagus nerve and why it's so important to really support and optimize the vagus nerve in our children and how that connects to microbiome and mental health. Could you explain a little bit about that, Elisa?
Yeah. So, as we mentioned briefly earlier, the vagus nerve is that information superhighway connecting your gut microbiome and your brain. And most of that communication occurs from your gut to your brain.
Mhm.
But the vagus nerve is, I mean, I love the vagus nerve, but there's a whole chapter in my book on the vagus nerve.
Right.
And when we look at optimizing vagus nerve function, which is really part of our parasympathetic nervous system, our kind of rest, digest, and heal part of our nervous system, is so important for full healing from any chronic disease. That is
Mhm.
one of the final pieces in getting well and not just getting well, but staying well. Because, I mean, as practitioners, we've all had the experience where we've gotten our patients well. Yay. They're,
Mhm.
quote, in remission,
Right.
but then they slide back. And if they
Yeah.
don't, if you can really restore that vagus nerve resilience, and one of the ways to measure vagus nerve resilience and health is called heart rate variability.
Mhm.
Now, heart rate variability is one of the best biomarkers for current and future health for children and for adults. And when we work on optimizing our vagus nerve function and improving heart rate variability, the fascinating thing is that that alone in children can improve gut microbiome diversity and function independent of diet. So for your
Wow.
kids, yes, I mean, independent of diet. Let me say that again,
Whoa.
because for some parents, especially when your kids are older, changing their diet can be one of the most daunting things. And
Yes.
yes, we still need to work on that and remove, the Takis and the artificial,
Yeah.
dyes and sweeteners. But at the same time, if that's one of the areas where you're having this push pull, then stop that and work on the vagus nerve and do that with your children. And, the vagus nerve, your listeners are familiar with this, but just as a background briefly, there are two arms of our autonomic nervous system. There's a sympathetic, which puts us into fight or flight, that stress response, which is a normal adaptive response to a stressor.
Right.
The proverbial saber-toothed tiger, you bet we needed our stress response to kick in so that we can run or fight or freeze, right?
Right.
But in our modern age right now, we have this proverbial saber-toothed tiger almost every moment of the day. We're late to school. I have an exam. My friend
Yep.
texted me something mean, like boom,
Yep.
boom, boom. So
Yep.
our sympathetic nervous system has way too much exercise every single day. Now, if we have a normal, a healthy stress response, and that should be matched by a parasympathetic rest, digest, and heal state saying, hey, the saber-tooth tiger's gone. Let's
Right.
calm back down, heal, and get back into our normal equilibrium. Well, our vagus nerve and our parasympathetic nervous system gets way too little exercise throughout the day. We have lost our ability to really actively engage our vagus nerve because of our modern lifestyle and stressors. And there's one cardiologist in Germany that has been tracking heart rate variabilities in children through the decades, and has found that compared to historical controls, like in the late 1900s, 1980s, let's say, our children's heart rate variabilities have decreased. And I would imagine that the very same is true for adults. So now we have less stress tolerance, less stress resilience, and guess what? Less immune system resilience, less microbiome resilience, because many people have this kind of misguided notion that the vagus nerve is all about just meditating and being calm. That is great, right? I
Yeah,
love that. Let's all be
absolutely.
calm.
For sure.
However, the vagus nerve, from a therapeutic, scientific, medical standpoint, is involved in resolving our inflammatory cascade. Keeping our immune system healthy, keeping our gut brain connection healthy. And so, we want to make sure that we're putting vagus nerve work, vagus nerve exercise up there and even higher, I will say, as, as your medications, your supplements, whatever it is really a true prescription for health.
Right.
And so teaching our kids how to engage their vagus nerve every single day is one of the surest ways to maintain microbiome resilience and also keep them thriving mind, body, spirit for the rest of their life.
Yeah. I am blown away right now that heart rate variability has that much of an effect on our microbiome.
Yeah.
I did not know that. So thank you for sharing that. So can you just really quickly explain what heart rate variability means? Because I know this is a term that can be a little confusing.
Yes.
Just really quickly. And then I want to jump into this idea of your term microbiome magic and creating that every day for this whole gut resilience that we're talking about. But what is heart rate variability exactly?
Yeah. So heart rate variability, or you'll see it also as HRV in the studies, or even in, the vagus nerve is having quite a day, but I want to really get down to the science of it, because, it's like I said, we don't want to just think of it as, I believe that mind-body medicine must be elevated to, as significant a medicine as any other modality. However, for many, unfortunately, still, when we talk about the vagus nerve, and mind-body medicine, it becomes when I have time for it.
Right.
Oh, that would be nice to do, but I have all these other more important things to do. So we really need to really lift its importance. But, with heart rate variability, it's actually a very simple concept. It is what it sounds like. It's the variability of your heart rate when you breathe in and when you breathe out. And so one thing that I do when I'm listening to a child's heart rate, a heartbeat, and I'm asking them to breathe in and out, I'm listening for heart rate variability. I mean, a very crude way, right?
Yeah.
Because we have tools like the Aura Ring or our Apple Watches that can measure more accurately. The other thing you can do, and I have parents do this in the office and kids, find your pulse, whether it's on your neck or on your inner wrist. My son was just asking me how to find pulses this morning, and I showed him all the different places we can feel pulses. But, you feel your pulse and you're just sitting there, and maybe your pulse is, you kind of see how fast it is. And then you take a slow breath in, and then you exhale. When you have optimal heart rate variability, your heart rate should speed up when you inhale and it should slow down when you exhale. When we're in sympathetic fight or flight, it's just boom, 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 fast and steady because we better be ready to go.
Right.
And so we want that. And so periodically throughout the day, you can just check, okay, am I in this kind of fight or flight? Is my heart rate kind of fast and steady? And no matter how I breathe, it's not changing? Or is it really able to slow down when I exhale?
Yeah. And so the variability is really that the more that you have a variable heart rate that can change with your inhale and exhale, the better your heart rate variability. That's a positive response, right?
Positive. We want that.
Yes.
And the next question I get asked is, well, is there, because some people have Aura Rings or Apple Watches, is there a number that's ideal? And so it's not a contest, right? We want to, what's ideal is what's ideal for you. And so that's why tracking it over time, because we all should have heart rate variability. Kids should have higher, but just because, your heart rate variability may be, 40 and your partner's is 90, there's not one that's better than the other. It's really what's right for you. And so there's no comparing here.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, and just to be clear, there's a lot of different ways you can measure. You said the Aura Ring, the Apple Watch. There are a lot of apps where you can get a little device that, that will track that.
Yes.
And it'll actually show you on the app your inhale and exhale, sort of like, and it allows you to sort of breathe into a circle.
Oh, that's heart math. I love heart math, guys.
Yes.
Yeah, that's you put an ear clip on and it doesn't tell you the number, but what it measures is your heart rate variability. Essentially, they call it coherence.
Yes.
We know, guys, we all have had this experience of being in a state of coherence, that flow state where you are on, you're in the zone, you are just so with it. And that state, when we can engage our breath, because diaphragmatic breathing is one of the best ways to engage our vagus nerve. And you see this rainbow flower going out.
Yes.
And then you inhale and exhale slowly. And it'll show you a green, red, or blue light to show, are you in coherence or do you need to slow it down even more?
Yeah.
I love it. Kids love heart math. It's such a great tool.
Yeah. I used heart math a lot with my kids when they were teens to help them visualize and understand, like, what's mom talking about all this breathing and this meditation? Being an Ayurvedic practitioner, right? They're like, oh my gosh, there she goes again. But I wanted to show them the sort of the science and sort of have a visual. Are there any specific tools for heart rate variability that you really love to use with kids? I mean, heart math is one of my favorites, but any other ones that you would suggest to parents?
No, I mean, so here's the thing for children, because there are several kind of vagus nerve devices now on the market, which I'm fascinated by, and I have a lot of them. But when you call the companies, most of them won't say that they are appropriate for children simply because they haven't tested them on children. And I have used, ear stimulators to improve heart rate variability in children in my practice, but there's no company that will blanketly say you can use this except for the Apollo Neuro device, the wearable, that uses vibrations and sound to stimulate your vagus nerve in different ways. And that one can be used in children. So that would be one that, for parents who are trying to look into a more passive way.
Sure.
The passive is great because sometimes you just need to get out of that fight or flight with some help.
Sure.
But then we also need to learn with heart math how we can do it our own, with our own breath.
Okay, great. And so let's move into, this idea of creating that microbiome magic that you talk about in your book for this, resilience, this whole gut resilience that we want to really help our kids with. What are some of the specific ideas tips, strategies that you could give to our listeners, maybe just, 2 or 3 things that they could get started with so they can feel like they can, go back into their lives after listening to this episode and think about how they can make some changes for their families.
Yes. Yes. So when in the book, you'll see a wheel of whole gut resilience with the 5 things for microbiome magic. And the reason I put in a wheel is because it doesn't matter where you start. You just start with what's easiest for you as a
Yes.
family. This is not about making things hard or making things undoable. It's just about taking the steps that you can. And the 5 things, the reason I call it the 5 things for microbiome magic is because these are the things that your child are doing every single day already. So this is not an add-on thing. It's not an, oh my gosh, I have to do one more thing, right? Of all the gazillion things we have to do. It's simply you're doing these things. So let's think about them in a way that can create microbiome magic instead. So one of the things is our vagus nerve. We breathe every day. Right. So that is one thing. So there are many, many different ways you can engage your vagus nerve, and we want to do it intentionally. And I give some examples in the book. But number one way is if we just ourselves learn how to breathe in a way that engages our vagus nerve and teach our children, we can do that anywhere, anytime without taking any extra time away from our busy schedules. Right.
Yeah.
And so that, and so many parents and kids they've forgotten how to diaphragmatic breathe because they're breathing with their shoulders up by their ears and only shallowly with the upper parts of their chest. So this is practicing when you're sitting there. We lower our shoulders down, keep your hand on your chest so your chest does not move while you're breathing. Your diaphragm is filling up your belly like a balloon as you breathe in and deflating as you breathe out. So as you inhale, that balloon in your belly is inflating, and as you exhale, the balloon in your belly is deflating, shoulders stay still. And if you're getting anxious or you're sitting in traffic, it's not going to move any faster if we're stressed like this. So you might as well relax your shoulders. Let's belly breathe. We're going to get there when we get there.
Yes.
Right. Same thing for kids sitting there getting anxious about a test. Right.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's one thing.
Great.
Or engage your vagus nerve in whatever way you like. I mean, laughing, hugging, gargling, singing, all of that. So that's one of the 5 things. 3 of the other 5 things are, how we move our bodies. When you exercise, your microbiome changes and improves, also independent of diet. When we sleep, it takes only 2 days of sleep deprivation to disrupt our microbiome, whereas it takes 7 days to restore. So prioritizing sleep. Hydration. Water drinkers tend to actually be better fruit and vegetable eaters and have more optimal microbiomes. And then, of course, one of the most important pieces is how we nourish our gut microbiome. And I split those up into 2 parts because if your child has a wide palate, then great, let's go with that. Let's get in the 3 F's, I call them, that really and truly optimize your gut microbiome. So fiber, fermented foods, and phytonutrients, which I know is a PH, but it sounds like an F. So I'd like to make things easy to remember: fiber, phytonutrients, and fermented foods. But if your kids are not, maybe they're tweens and teens and they're going out buying chips or drinks at the, bubble tea place with their friends, then the best thing we can do is the second part of Nourish, understanding what to keep out, all of those microbiome mischief makers. If we learn how to read food labels like a gut hero and help your kids assess which ingredients that they should keep out and figure out what swaps to make, they can still buy a bag of chips and eat it with their friends. But instead of choosing the Takis with the artificial red dye and the monosodium glutamate, they can choose a package of Siete Fuego grain-free tortilla chips, right? With none of the added food additives that disrupt your microbiome. Or instead of getting the prime hydration drink with sucralose and acesulfame potassium, they can choose another. My son's favorite is called Liquid Death. It's the funniest name.
I know.
But it actually...
Awesome. I know.
But it actually is a cleaner version. And he can have a can that looks cool, sit with his friends, but it doesn't have the other junk in it.
Right. Right. I love all of these ideas because again, what we're doing is we're equipping our kids with this multitude of different ways to support their microbiome. And like you said, it's this idea of just changing how we're viewing the things we're doing every day and moving
Mhm.
it towards health. This is so much of what I talk about in Ayurveda is that it's not about necessarily, trying to replace everything. It's about
Yes.
putting more of the good stuff in, the health supportive stuff into our lives, and it'll crowd out the bad stuff.
Yeah.
Really, it's that, perspective that you're sharing.
Well, and the thing with Ayurveda and, traditional medicines in this approach is it is not a regimented,
Right.
it has to be done in this particular way.
Right.
Because no matter what, if we don't have joy in
Yes.
how we're eating and living, we're not going to improve our health. And so this is not about, nagging your kids and, oh my gosh, I can't believe you picked that. It's okay, right? If we lay the
Mhm.
foundations, their microbiomes can bounce back. And it's about, like you said, equipping and empowering our kids so that when they are out of the house and when they're young adults or parents of their own,
Yes.
they know how to make these choices for themselves and then they can teach their kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I could keep talking to you, Elisa, for hours and hours. But I really appreciate everything that you have shared because it's such a balanced, holistic, empowering way to help our kids. And I really appreciate that because, there are not a lot of us who are in this world who always do that. And it can be really scary for us to make these changes for ourselves, but especially for our kids. It's like, oh my God, how am
Yeah.
I going to do this? But you're providing such a realistic, I think, and doable way to do these things with our kids. So thank you for doing that. I think it's really, really empowering. So thank you. And I also feel like this is a really good place to sort of wrap up our time together. And so I just have one last question for you, which I always ask my guests. If I offer up the phrase to catalyze healing, what comes up for you?
The word that always comes up for me when I think about healing is joy. I mentioned that before, but joy. We have to find the joy in life. And this is not to belittle, the stressors and the difficulties in life, but this is to say in every moment, no matter the struggle, there is always a light and a joy. And if we
Mhm.
reach for that, that will catalyze your healing.
Yeah. Elisa, thank you so much for your time. I so appreciate you and all the amazing work that you're doing in the world. It's really important. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks again for listening to The Healing Catalyst. If you love what you heard, please hit follow and pass it along to a friend. And if you're feeling really inspired, please rate and review so that others can find this podcast more easily. To learn more, head to avantikumarsingh.com. And to connect with me directly, find me on Instagram at Avanti Kumar Singh. I'll be back next week and hope that you will be too. Until then, remember, with the right catalyst, you have the power to activate your own healing because healing starts within.